What are your thoughts on first time versus second time founders?
I think there's a lot to be said for naivety. The value of actually not knowing how effing hard it's going to be and approaching things from first principles. I think all of us have always had a really strong adverse reaction when we see a co-CEO title.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
But here, they've made it work.
I try and make sure that organizations never use restructuring for downsizing. Keep downsizing in the negative context, right? I've got to cut people. But restructuring, make that exciting.
It's going to be a bloody hard task to try and get a successful outcome. And if you're sleeping too well, like you don't have that necessity to get up and fight.
We all have behaviors when things get uncertain, when things get challenging, when things get problematic, and we tend to default to the worst of ourselves. And they obviously were able to handle that. This is an interesting chart. Swear words in Taylor Swift's albums.
This is possibly your best chart yet, Don.
Where did you find this, Don?
I reckon he made it. I reckon he's listening to Swifty that much. He's charted it himself.
A survey on Blind from 119 former and current Canva employees of what they're going to do with their cash. Some recent research on 1,123 unicorns. Startups with 3 or 4 co-founders are 74% more likely to become unicorns. Writing an article about co-founders and not talking about the potential conflict and only talking about the value, to me, is daft, because what this data doesn't show is the tens of thousands, if not millions, of co-founders that fell apart.
Rule 0, don't get dead. Stay in business, stay operational.
Good morning, how are we?
Awesome. How are you boys?
Yeah, going all right. They're having a few laptop issues, but besides that, going well.
That's all right. This episode has to be full of energy, boys, because last week, after a little screw-up, I went to TH7 Labs last night with a few friends, and one of them, Adrian, avid listener, just to listen to me screw up, he said, "You're a bit flat last week." You could just tell, not recording it first time, just really took the energy out.
Maren said the exact same thing. She listened to it. She said, that was not your usual energy. I could tell you guys were just done, didn't want to do it again.
In what time was it? It was in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right?
She's normally, you're so excited when there's a new topic, you're cracking jokes. You guys just came across, do we really have to do this again?
And it's nothing to do with the fact that you've given up alcohol, Aaron?
No, I still have a will to live. Unrelated.
We'll move into it quickly. So you've been doing a bit more work on the mission, all of the applicants, and what are we at now? 20 something?
We'd be mid-30s in total. So we have, this week we just confirmed the SA.
Mid-30s?
Yeah.
How are we going to handle that?
Yeah, so Maren, who's trying to find venues for us in the UK at the moment, is struggling to find room sizes big enough to accommodate the delegation, which I'm trying to describe, this is a good problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, so we locked in the South Australian delegation this week. The Goldie delegation is 99% locked in. And the Queensland applicants, the shortlist has been done and it's with the Queensland government for sign-off. So we'll know our final mission composition hopefully by the end of the week.
Yeah, and for those that get the most out of these sessions, it's the pre-work that they're going to be doing. So when they land, they have people that they're going to talk to. They have things that they want to understand. Obviously, 80 to 90% of it is built around the sessions we provide and put them in front of and what have you. But those that get a lot of value hit the ground. And I think it's one thing to do market research. It's another thing to hit someone up on LinkedIn to say, hey, I'm going to be in London or I'm going to be in Manchester. Would love to have a chat to you about X, Y, and Z. And what we find is often people just say yes for the novelty of someone that's traveling that distance. They're willing to give you some time that they may not ordinarily give you in terms of a phone call or a Zoom.
Yeah, it's a good point. And part of being on a delegation, and particularly one that's government backed, is that opens more doors as well. There's a credibility element to that. But yeah, just in terms of the stage of companies, like good, solid traction in a lot of the cohort, capital raise, they're in great positions to take advantage of the UK market. So I can't wait. And it's coming up super fast. It's 5 weeks.
So if anybody wonders if we're not an early stage business ourselves, 5 weeks, don't have all the venues, we fly our plane and we build it at the same time.
We absolutely do. I remember last year, got into London a couple of days earlier and just sat on the laptop smashing out final logistics and venue changes and all sorts of pieces.
Make it work.
Yep. But looking forward to it.
What are you most looking forward to, Jeff?
Definitely the cohort. I know some of the founders in Gold Coast and Adelaide, so I know both this time. So it's going to be a good cohort.
You are the head of sensational events.
Yep. Founders that want to get themselves in a really great place revenue-wise, and I think don't we all? But to apply for future missions as well, check out our offsite coming up. It's a growth summit targeting B2B founders and investors and really focused on sustainable growth, but building your scalable sales engine, but at the same time recognizing that you as the founder have to grow at least as fast as the company you're growing. And then how do you instill that culture within inside your organization so that you can navigate change and conflict and everything else while trying to build a fast-moving machine?
Yeah, and I mean that under that umbrella of sales machine covers so many different aspects, whether it be go-to-market, whether it be lead generation, systemizing a lot of really getting a systemic and repeatable way of building those aspects of the business. One of the things that we often also find is it's one thing for you to try and sort things out for yourself and get advice from people like ourselves. But when you're in the room with a range of other founders and investors that have either trodden the path before and can give their advice or just have a different perspective, there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah.
Great. Let's get into it. So just recapping from a prior episode, last week we talked about how Tritium at pretty well every level had gone into administration, and always starts to come out now is receivers and administrators start giving their reports as to why things started, as to why things went down the way they did. And from an article in the AFR by Tess Bennett, I'll just read a few bits from there. The receivers selling the shell of failed electric vehicle charging company Tritium blame its $2 billion listing via the controversial Spac method for its demise. As structuring experts trying to sell Tritium scour for reasons for its demise, documents lodged with the corporate regulator show its lenders were preparing for potential collapse actually 5 months before it went under. Executives and directors from Tritium held 21 teleconferences with restructuring experts, KPMG, between November and April, November 22 and April, between November 2023 and April 24, when the Brisbane-based company was finally placed into administration. The Spac merger, so this is getting to some of the issues people have found, the Spac merger itself tied Tritium to a complicated and expensive capital structure that then didn't provide access to capital that the company needed to survive. There was no financial benefit for Tritium through the Spac merger, and once it was listed on the NASDAQ, the market judged it pretty harshly for a whole range of reasons. The US listing made the company more expensive to operate, while inefficiencies in its production and manufacturing also strained its balance sheet. A combination of all those things meant Tritium burned through the capital it did have and wasn't able to find additional capital once it had. The shame is that it was probably only 6 to 12 months away from being cash flow break even. They just needed more money and time. That last line, that hurts. I've been there a few times. But
Yeah.
it's just really interesting how structure achieves strategy. And yes, at the time they got all the news and the unicorn status and all that stuff, but they tied themselves to a structure that fucked them.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that you can have a great business, but the structuring of the deals and the term of the deal and how the capital is raised, but also how you do your contracts and sales, all these things can just fuck you. They can destroy a very good business.
And I know a lot of people say, oh, they've been planning this for a long time. In my own experience, having the misfortune of putting something into administration from a duty of care point of view under the trading insolvent rules, you actually have to be taking steps and be able to demonstrate them in hindsight that you are acting in the best interest of the company, creditors, all of that. And so a lot of people get a little bit surprised that, oh, you've been planning this. In my experience, and I think it'll be the same here, you weren't planning to put it in administration. You were planning to save it. You were undertaking your fiduciary duty, getting advice. You were looking at restructuring options. You were looking at a range of ways to get capital. Now, when the first administrator's report comes out, they then detail when those calls occurred. And it looks like, in hindsight, that it was this long-term plan thing, but it's not actually the way it works. And having been there, you are scrambling, trying to save the company. You're looking at all sorts of different funding options. You're looking at all sorts of different ways to make it work. And then one day you just run out of puff and you accept that you can't. And that's when you appoint.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been more concerning had they not done anything until the point of ultimate demise. But it is a common criticism, right? And then the other thing that's often leveled is why didn't they disclose this to XYZ, or why didn't they inform someone? But like we know, the challenge with that is when you disclose these things, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, whereas you're trying to save the company.
You're dead in the water if you come out in that kind of manner.
Yeah. And just for listeners, I mean, it's a term that gets thrown around, SPAC. If you're not familiar with it, it's a special purpose acquisition company. That's what it stands for. Publicly traded. And the purpose of it is for you to go and acquire or merge an existing company. But Don, before we kicked off, we were just talking about why they use so often and what are the kind of success rates, because they tend to make the news a fair bit.
Yeah, I'll share my screen. We're not supposed to be getting to charts so early.
I've never heard you complain about getting into charts too early.
A founder actually called yesterday to get some advice on something and left with having to read 2 books. So he won't be making that mistake again.
Actually, Jack, Don and I have decided we're sending a book pack to new portfolio codes. Kind of like recommended reading.
Helmer's 7 Powers, Ideal Executive and Why You Can't Be One, because that gives a really great intro to PAEI and styles and management and PIPs and trust and respect and all that kind of jazz. Then Mastering Change, which gives a really good understanding of how to build that culture that can identify and resolve problems faster than they come up. And then Life Cycle, Organizational Life Cycle by Ishak Adizes, because then they can actually see more of the stuff that's normal and be ready for what's ahead of them. So that's going to be our little reading pack, little welcome pack.
Love it.
Yeah.
So anyway, on the screen, so SPAC IPOs, we can see when COVID came and you just had this unbelievable amount of money. Like in 2018, 2019, there were 70 or 80 SPACs? Then in 2020, 250. Then in 2021, over 600. And then it's obviously died off. That was IPOs. And then the mergers is where the SPAC had already acquired something but then merged with something else. And that follows a similar chart. So we can just see this absolutely blow off top that clearly wasn't sustainable. And then it fell back to earth. Now, so the way a core SPAC works is that the SPAC promoter or the SPAC manager raises money, which I believe is at about $10 a share. And then the market capitalization is just depending on how much they can raise. And then they go out looking for private companies. They go out looking for the next best thing that isn't listed yet. But the shareholders still have to vote as to whether they're happy for that deal to go ahead. And if the SPAC hasn't done its acquisition within a certain period of time, that SPAC promoter has to give the money back, which is really expensive for them because they get lumped with the fees. We can see before COVID, like between 40 and 70% of SPAC deals were rejected by the shareholders, going, nah, you found a business we don't like, give us our money back. Then in COVID, that drops to like 22%, then to like 10%, where it's just like, nah, spend the money, baby, get it out. Let's get some acquisitions going. And then we can see that the rate of rejection has continued to grow up to 80 and over 90% in this last data. And when you have a look at the SPAC performance, all of this money went in, but the majority of SPACs are actually down 80%. Some of them are only down around 40%, when the Russell at the same time period for this chart, so the Russell 2000, so that's like the 2,000 largest stocks in the US, that was down around about 18%. So SPACs generally have just been atrocious. And that's because it's sort of like, I've got this money and holy shit, I'm going to de-SPAC in 6 months if I'm not careful. I've just got to go and find something. And during those irrational times. And that's where Nikola was like Tesla, but for hydrogen trucks. Trevor Milton ended up in jail because he defrauded his way in. And so Tritium seems to have been caught up in this absolute hype where it went and did a deal with a SPAC that obviously the SPAC agreed to billions of dollars of valuation, but the SPAC structure, from what we're understanding here, then didn't allow for the easy ongoing raising of capital when things didn't quite go the way they needed to go. And then it never goes the way that it's meant to go. And my gut feel, from what I understand, is the SPAC gave rise to this massive increase in production, increase in expansion. And as a reminder, your rate of growth correlates to your rate of problems. So the faster you grow, the more problems you're going to have. And so that's why it's really important to speed up your company's ability to solve problems if you're going to try and achieve growth. Often, a lot of companies don't. They just go, no, we're just going to grow, without investing in the culture and the climate that identifies and resolves those problems faster than what they were happening before. And then the company gets into the shit. And as you can see, 6 months ago, they started talking to restructuring firms. So a lot of problems, and they just couldn't solve it.
Structuring for growth, something we talk about a lot. We had an online workshop, I think titled Structuring for Growth, and we had, one person sign up, because it's one of those things founders don't think about.
Yeah, it's a bit too boring. We might change the title to something like Super Hyper Mega Workshop Guaranteeing Success and Not Failure.
Yeah. Yeah. Foundations of blitzscaling. Like something that points to the positive.
We're probably not going to get engaged for our marketing prowess. Yeah, so that's sad to see. We'll see what happens. Someone, I think, is going to get a ripping deal, because if they were only 6 or 12 months away from cash flow break even, and they've got an underlying business that's producing something that customers want, and this whole issue hasn't damaged their brand in the market from a product point of view, someone's going to do all right.
Yeah. I think so long as if someone picks it up in a timely fashion and it doesn't decay brand or contracts, then sounds like good business fundamentals underneath the hood.
That's why I like things where the product and the management and leadership are separated. When someone buying the product couldn't give a shit who the shareholders are, the leadership, what's happening at management level, any conflict. Having been in a business before that's high trust and it's all about the people, and the product and the people can't be separated, when shit happens like this, your brand never comes back. Like it just turns to shit. Whereas the companies that do survive administration, liquidation, it's like, oh, there's a great product. And if you asked your customers, 90 probably didn't even know what's happened at the ownership level. I like those products. So let's segue from something that didn't work out and ended poorly to something that very much has worked out, which is Atlassian. The big news that's out this week is that Scott Farquar is actually stepping down from his co-CEO role.
I was really surprised, and I totally missed this. When you told me this yesterday, I was really surprised. It's going to be interesting to see. It was interesting in some of the commentary saying, Michael, pick it up, no problem at all, like business as usual, which is, of course, how they'll position things. But it'd be interesting to know, Scott's kind of motivations and where he's off to next.
Yeah, what's interesting in these kinds of things is the story behind the story, and that takes a little while to come out.
Yeah.
So let's just see what else comes out in the future. But every now and then somebody achieves absolute greatness and actually quits on top, doesn't wait for something to smash them in the face. So this could be one of those things. And what a partnership of those two, like 26 years, which we'll get into. But Bronwyn Clune and Dan Van Boom put out an article, and in it says, so what does the breakup of one of the most successful work marriages mean for the company? Farquar and Mike Cannon-Brookes assured investors and analysts on Friday's Q3 earnings call that the pair regularly rotated responsibilities, including midnight at their first office, and promising that Cannon-Brookes will at no point be out of his depth as a single parent for the company. It's the business world's equivalent of a healthy, conscious uncoupling. And there's a couple of things that I want to pack there. What we find with companies that get to a certain scale that have really great leadership development is where they actually push people into managing different roles. At Tech One, Adrian talked about it. He would put people out of their comfort zones. Luke Annear from Safety Culture talked about moving people around. And so I think that's absolutely great. What I would say, though, is that often what we're talking about here is I don't think somebody's competency to handle it. It's their capacity to handle it. And one of the challenges I often see is that founders don't realize their genius. Like genuinely, even the most successful founders, they often unable to attribute all the great things they do, especially on the micro basis. We'll talk to founders and they'll say, my business runs itself. Oh, yeah. So tell me about the last time you went on holidays. Oh, yeah. No, I'd only touch base, for 15 minutes a day. Not realizing those little 15 minutes can be little course corrections, can be big course corrections. Go do this, go do that. Oh, that's okay. I'll handle that. Oh, hang on. Have you thought of this? They're little things that just keep the business on a track. You take that out and you don't have that energy, that little bit of course correction, that entrepreneurialism, whatever that injection might be, however small. You take that out, and what happens is the change loop that we talk about often starts to go unaddressed because that person and that energy wasn't there. So the question is going to become is that if we assume that both Farquar and Cannon-Brookes are working hard, and you take one of them out and you put all of the things that Farquar was doing onto Cannon Brooks' shoulders, is he going to be able to have the same level of capacity, especially when I believe they won't understand and attribute the little things that they do? Are they going to be able to keep on that same trajectory?
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind for me is the little internal cultural nuances that so each founder brings to the table, and then there's natural allegiances or respect biases. And so when one leaves, what can happen is that cascading effect of then potentially others leaving in the senior management team because they were loyal to one versus the other, or just the changing culture that can occur. Even when you've tried to systemize your culture and put structure around it, the reality is the founders are the key elements that drive that. And so even when founders are very similarly aligned, they have their own little nuances that they bring into the workplace every single day. And to your point, like those subtleties, once they're removed, it can actually have ripple effects.
People will say, Atlassian's now tens of thousands of people. What you're saying is rubbish. It's too big for that.
No.
The life cycle model that we A, subscribe to and B, experience is that we don't look at size, we don't look at length of time, we look at the relationship between flexibility and controllability and predictability and a range of other ingredients. And people would be surprised to understand how a single individual can still permeate and inspire and drive tens of thousands of people, and that in a culture that big can see little problems that others can't, that can see opportunities that others can't. People find it hard to get their head around that it could possibly be the same at that scale, but it absolutely is.
I think the other thing to chat about here is the co-CEO titles. Like,
So
we have a natural aversion.
You want to make, I thought this was going to be a positive.
But there's always an exception to every rule. I think all of us have always had a really strong adverse reaction when we see a co-CEO title.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
But here, they've made it work.
So this is me from the outside, and my previous life in consulting to large businesses, small businesses, billionaires. Like the titles, you've got to look through the titles. What happens in these relationships is you've got people with deep trust and respect, and they naturally orientate to certain bits. One person ends up making the decisions about certain parts of the business. Another person is making decisions about another part of the business. And they're often on a lot of things not crossing over. They put forward to the outside world, oh, we're co-CEOs, but not actually what's happening behind the scenes. And what you will find behind co-CEOs is either there is a dominant one. Now, I'm not saying in this situation that's the case because I don't know. But when I look at some of these ones before, I was like, no. Ultimately, it defaults to this person who makes that final decision. Or that somebody's more dealing with the internal stuff and someone's dealing more with the external. And they call it co-CEOs. In reality, it's probably better CEO and COO, but let's keep it co-CEOs. But they're not blending across every single decision. They've actually separated it.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was almost just myself laughing there because I can't remember if it's coming on screen. You were doing this, and like this side, Don's in a circle jerk.
God. There is no way that I'm editing that out, by the way.
Right, Don, Don, have you got any tips for early stage founders when there are two co-founders in the early stage of their life cycle?
My advice is don't pitch tribe if you've got co-CEOs.
Good advice.
Straight off the bat. But actually, structure is a separate thing, right? What we've actually got to first do is, what is the vision and the mission of this business? What is the strategy? That needs to be understood, because then you build a structure to achieve that vision and mission. And there is no one-size-fits-all structure. We shouldn't look at other companies and say, oh, but they're successful, I'm going to copy them. No, we might be able to learn some things from them. What is the vision? What is the mission? And the way I like to approach those, the vision is I want to win the war. It's like a longer term thing. It's this bigger thing. And then we have a series of missions. Today, I've got to take the beach. Then we've all got to get up to the top of the hill. Like a series of missions is what's going to hopefully get you to winning your vision, is the way I like to get that cascaded. And so what you're then regularly doing is saying, okay, our mission is this 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and your mission really should be dependent on how fast your environment moves. Like some companies have to redo their mission under this structure every 6 months just because it's such a fast-paced environment. The vision really shouldn't change all that much unless you're really pivoting and you've found yourself in a bad place. But it's common that the missions will update. So then, okay, in order for us to achieve the mission, what's the structure to achieve that mission? Which is why I try and make sure that organizations never use restructuring for downsizing. Keep downsizing in the negative context, right? I've got to cut people. But restructuring, make that exciting. Okay, we're coming up to a new restructure. What does that mean? Growth, new roles, new opportunities. Why are we restructuring? Because we've achieved that previous mission. Now we need the next mission. And so then when you're restructuring, then you look at the business and you say, okay, what are the roles and responsibilities that I need to achieve this mission? What are the different authorities that are required? What are the different reward systems? What are the different goals and KPIs and info flows? And so it doesn't matter whether you're Atlassian or you're a two-person business. That process is exactly the same. Now, I personally just don't like to see people get in the habit of co-CEO. You have a CEO, you have a COO, you have a C this, you have a C. That's the role and responsibility matrix that we need to put in place. You are in charge of this. And we are developing trust and respect. And these are the decisions that you are expected to make. This is the authority you have to make decisions by yourself. And this is where your authority is limited, and we must make them as a team. That's a systemic way of operating. Because as different missions come in, maybe we need a HR administrator, but now we're of the certain side, we need HR development, which is very different. Right now, we just need a financial controller, and that's going to control us in this region. Oh, we're going to a new region. New mission. Okay, so we need to update the structure. Maybe it's time for a CFO. So a whole lot of the things the CEO was handling around fundraising or whatever, we're going to change our structure. So those responsibilities and authority moves to that role. What we try and do is get this iterative approach that always matches structure back to the mission, and the mission is there to achieve the vision. Then the people side is the final element. Once you've gone, okay, this is the structure I need to achieve this mission. Do I have the people? And often in a fast-growing company, you should have more hats than you have people. Okay, we can't afford these 3 roles. So Jimbo, you're going to wear 3 hats, but each of those 3 hats have very clear role and responsibility, a very clear authority, clear reward systems, clear goals and KPIs. As we grow and we get some capital, the goal is to then hand a hat to someone else. We're now growing. Okay, you can take that hat so you can now focus here more. And in the growing phases, we want to see far more hats, far more roles and responsibilities than people, because then you're keeping the organization nimble, you're keeping it stretched. And that's just a recipe. We'll be going through all of that in the offsite. That's one of the things we go into. But that's the way I would look at it. Don't arbitrarily think of, I've got to have a role and responsibility that's got to have each of these things and do all of this. No, hang on. What's your mission? And missions have to be updated. Like for us, we're probably coming up to the point where we should re-look at some of that stuff, because we've finished our internal cap raise. We've got the rest of this year in terms of bringing on our captive fund, some targets that we have with syndicated deals. There's some portfolio support stuff. There's our event stuff. We've got a vision that shouldn't ultimately change, but our mission prior to completing our capital raise was to really get the capital raise done, get some deals done, get a whole lot of different things. We've achieved that mission. Like we've got if Aaron would please stop fucking inviting people to the mission because we're full. Now our mission isn't to just pull off that mission. Our mission now has to change that, how we make that systemic. What are the resources that need to occur? So we will be taking our own medicine. But anyway, a long answer to a short question, Jack. And the other thing with relationships that last that long, my reflection there is that there would have been some ingredients between those two. You don't last 26 years. Clearly, you would have had to have had a lot of respect. You don't last that long if you don't respect the other person. And then the other part of that is trust. Like you just can't operate if you don't have that level of trust. And then we all have behaviors when things get uncertain, when things get challenging, when things get problematic, and we tend to default to the worst of ourselves. And they obviously were able to handle that. And actually, it was on a Pivot podcast that I listened to the other day where Cara and Scott were getting interviewed by Esther Perel. And one of the points that came out of that I just found really interesting was both of them acknowledged is when the other party fucks up, they don't shift to shame. They don't seek to shame or there's this acceptance that we're not perfect, but they have this higher vision. They had these sort of values. They had their regular missions. And I would say, having a look at some successes and failures, a default position of not moving to shame is actually an incredibly important trait.
I think there's a lot of lessons from primary relationships and different studies of those relationships and success and failure ingredients that could be applied for co-founders. And absolutely that. When shit goes wrong, even when one of you has made a mistake.
Like not turning on a podcast recording machine and spending 90 minutes and then creating the shittiest episode we've ever made. That kind of thing, just never bringing it up again.
Or not returning equipment to hire companies so that they're almost refusing to ever hire us equipment again.
Aaron.
But we're in this together, Don. We're solving these problems together.
No, that's true. And after this podcast, I will be using my own credit card to pay the overages on that, because that's what trust and respect is all about. I'm not going to make tribe pay for my incompetence.
No, but it's so true about solving. You work the problem together. And I think a good team takes that approach of they're mission focused, whatever's happening, just in the trenches together, working towards that common goal.
Jack?
No, I don't have anything to add there, Dom. That was good.
There's also the next potential at Atlassian in terms of success, which is Canva. And Canva is a frequent topic of our discussions on the podcast. And they've had their big secondaries released. And a lot of employees and investors have done well out of the secondaries. And there's been a bit of commentary in the AFR about how the employees might be using that returned capital now.
Yeah, so we've been talking on this podcast how excited we are about all that money flowing back. But Nick Bonyhady pointed out that there was a survey on Blind from 119 former and current Canva employees of what they're going to do with their cash. 3% of them are going to start a company. And I think it's like close to 60% are going to buy a house or pay off their mortgage.
Which I don't blame them. But I think the thing to point out here is when we say recycling of cash, we probably meant the LPs with the super funds. And it was just validating that this asset class can return capital. And that's the biggest takeaway here.
I must admit, I hadn't even thought of, when thinking about the recycling of capital, I must admit, I'd never even thought of the staff. It's like the LPs and the investors, that's their job. Now, are some of these going to start up a business? 3% are saying that then they're going to start, but that's now. I will absolutely bet you that a big chunk of people that said, no, I'm not going to start a business in the years to come.
Yeah, I think the reality is like it'll be a high percentage will start a business, but it won't be bootstrapped. Like they'll still take on funding and therefore they can still pay off their mortgage with this recycling of capital.
Yeah, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs is at play. First thing, what's foremost in their mind? House, home, shelter. Getting rid of the mortgage, becoming debt-free. And it's only once those things are in place, then they can lift their line of sight to the next level of the hierarchy. And so I totally agree. I think, we'll likely see more than 3% go on over the next, 5+ years to potentially start a business. Yeah, never expected that to be the measure of success of a secondary for the ecosystem. It's the return of capital to investors and how that should now recycle through to more investments.
Having cash on hand to pay late fees on hire equipment, important. For any person that does start a business, does prior success guarantee success? I think it's a conversation that often happens in VC land. Should second-time founders more backable than first-time founders? If you've had some great success, does that mean that it's going to lead to more success? So there was a post by Paolo Di Vincenzo that put out some data, and the data set was, I think, a Harvard business study that founders that had a previous big exit, 70% of them still failed in their next business. If they had a previous failure, 80% failed, and first-time founders, 82% failed. On one hand, you can say that it's, 50% more or 30% more likely that there is success from a previous big success. But I think people would be very interested to learn that actually 70% of big exited founders don't just find it easy because they've learnt everything.
Yeah, I think even though it might be potentially easier to raise capital, at least by experience and lessons learned and networks and everything else, still the odds aren't that much better. And something we talk about a lot is what happens when you have a successful exit and suddenly, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like suddenly you don't have a burning need, like back against the wall need to make this successful. Maybe it's changed your emotional state. Maybe whatever chip you had on your shoulder about whatever happened in your childhood and who you need to prove wrong and my father didn't love me enough or whatever it is, whatever validation they've been hunting for, maybe some of that has been met with an exit and some data point that they are successful. And so it's interesting how it can change the emotional factors, the motivators, dependent of the other ingredients that you get.
Yeah, but the other ingredients as well, I find most successful people misdiagnose the reason for their success.
There's skill and luck.
Yeah, so true.
But then there's the intentional stuff that wasn't skill and luck that they don't acknowledge or can't see. And that it's interesting
And what's worse, that can reinforce the continued behavior. So maybe they had success despite themselves, but now it's reinforced. And, in that particular circumstance, yes, they got lucky, whatever. But now they're trying to apply the exact same principles. And it turns out, actually, no, that wasn't an effective strategy or approach.
The outlier book is people seemingly from nowhere came from nothing and achieved greatness. That's at least the story that a lot of people would like to put forward about themselves, because it puts more control, or it was their intelligence. And actually what he breaks down is timing, opportunity by parents, right? A whole lot of other factors. You take those away, there's no Bill Gates, there's no Warren Buffett, there's no any of that. So the biggest precursors to the size of their success is stuff not in their control. Bill's mother managed to get access, like when he was 12 or something, to one of the supercomputers late at night. Bill's tapping away, learning shit while this whole industry is coming. Like, you take that away and you don't have that access. You don't have Microsoft. That wasn't Bill's genius. That was his mother giving him an amazing opportunities that didn't have. Then you get timing, then you get whatever else. So that's, I think in one of the previous episodes, I had a spit at private school boy using the word self-made. It's just bullshit.
I think the other thing that can happen is, almost that sense of entitlement. If a founder's had a successful exit and they, for example, like shifting into VC, how many founders do we see have an exit, come into VC, go and approach investors, like, back me because I did this thing well?
I feel so under attack today.
No, I'm about to say the fact that, a lot of our thesis in how we formed Tribe was, despite any previous successes and failures, it was recognition we have to prove our ability to operate in this space at this time and together as a team from scratch. Hence why we started with syndication rather than leaping straight to a fund.
A few things here. Like, what are your thoughts on first time versus second time founders?
I think there's a lot to be said for naivety. The value of actually not knowing how effing hard it's going to be and approaching things from first principles. I think there's a lot to be said for first time founders, actually.
I'm almost 50-50. Like, it's more like, how do I spend time with these people when they're behaving badly so I can work out if that's somebody I want to be in the trenches with, whether they're first time or second time. Like, second time founder in a totally new industry, so they don't know all of those things, but they've got some experiences and lessons. I like people with spikes and shit not going well and have been able to bounce back. But, we're looking at a deal at the moment where he and his wife went to Fiji and set up and ran a
eco resort
and all the stuff that they had to deal with there. And it was just sounded catastrophic. And the locals then ended up stealing part of the business, and he bounced back. Now he's in a totally different thing, but I bet you there's lessons there.
Yeah. I don't know. One of the things I look at is, how good are you at eating shit sandwiches, but making sure that they're not producing their own shit sandwiches. They're just, making sure it's not causality. But yeah, I like how you frame that, Don. Like, naivety, skills and experience coming in with some naivety to something new gets interesting.
Which sort of Vu Tran's point when he was talking about, he doesn't want to invest anything in health. He's a GP 2 days a week, but he's playing in the defense space, partly because he doesn't know any better and he thinks it's exciting.
Yeah. So true.
And what about you, Jack? You've not come from the operator path, but you've been in the trenches with us and you've seen founders at all ends of the spectrum. Where are you landing?
So you can't deny that experience helps. So second time founders definitely have an edge there, but first time founders definitely have a lot of energy and have that determination to fight harder because they don't have that experience. So I think when you pair a first time founder with the right resources, e.g. the right mentors, putting them around them to short circuit that pain and suffering that they're going to inevitably go through, I think that's a really good combination. Because you look at some of the biggest companies in the world, like Facebook, Amazon, they were all first-time founders, and like they all fought really hard, got through that pain and suffering of what a first-time founder has to go through, and still came out the other side.
I think it's fair to say, like, it'd be a lazy investor who said, I only back second or multi-time founders, or only those who've had success, or only those who've had... Ultimately, you've got to do the work to understand the individual that you're backing.
Yes, and as we keep referencing, you don't know the individual until you're in the shit.
Yeah.
And how do we manufacture situations when we're all in the shit together before that check clears?
Yep. And maybe an interesting segue conversation is, how do we feel about founders that are doing multiple things at the same time? Because it was interesting that the Mick Dempsey event we had, Mick shared that he actually drew income from other places, and easy fuck, is it Easy Debit? It's Easy Debit. So Mick was drawing income from other sources while building Easy Debit, and he's actually quite open to founders doing other things at the same time as their venture, whereas we're quite different in our view, focus and conviction, and we want to see the founder building their life's work and really committed to building their life's work.
Love Mick. He's a shareholder and a venture partner. There are parts of the Easy Debit story that he can't possibly connect with and see because he was in the painting, busting his ass and doing other bits and pieces. There are some situations where we might look at it. It depends on what is the income, what is the situation, where's the level of distraction, commitment, whatever else. Like you say, it's not black and white. Broadly though, if you had to curve fit, people that do multiple things, that have multiple focuses, even if it's 10 minutes a day, that's 10 minutes a day not going to solving a problem or just pushing an opportunity a little bit further or just doing something because you're off doing something else. It doesn't, it's just so hard in this space and it takes so much human mindset and energy. And I just don't believe multitasking and phase shifting between different things is good, partly because I do it and I just know that I'm often an underperforming clown. Now, structurally we do it because we're getting tribe up and we've got to do various things, but it's not, I wouldn't call it efficient and effective. I'm doing what's needed to do and spinning the plates, but it's not ideal.
No, but I'd add to that, Don, like the things that you do and that we've all had to do at different points. Like the short term, the tactical is very much in alignment with the strategic. That what we are each doing is in alignment with where we want to go.
Just to add to that as well, it's also necessity. Like we don't have a heap of optionality right now. So it's almost, we have to do this. But if you're a founder and you've got optionality, as an investor, I'd rather you burn the boats instead of taking a nice, healthy salary elsewhere. Because I know it's gonna be a bloody hard task to try and get a successful outcome. And if you're sleeping too well, you don't have that necessity to get up and fight. But if we were then backing a founder, follow-on funding wasn't an option, and they had to go and get a second outcome to make sure that they could keep fighting to solve this problem. 100%, that is the right course. But it's more so whether or not a founder is drawing a big salary from a separate company where this really just becomes a side hobby. And that's when alignment isn't there.
Yeah, behavioral incentive. Rule 0, don't get dead. Stay in business, stay operational. Absolutely. But I like how you frame that, Jack, like the optionality and then how that influences decision-making, emotional connection, grit, resilience, when things go to shit.
Think like innovation, the main driver of innovation is necessity. Like when you have no other option, your back's against the wall, you pull something out. And every time you're like, I didn't think I had that in me, but I found a way. But then if you're sleeping too good, you don't need to fight. You have no reason to go that deep.
It's totally true. There's an opportunity that came up for me yesterday in a conversation where a few years ago, before the current position, I would have just been chomping. And now, at least in that particular thing, it's, just the energy and the effort and the whatever else. You're right, Jack. That's doing separate things, but often when companies are born, there are co-founders. And this is a conversation that we've discussed a few times. And there was a post by Kevin Jurovic, Power of Co-Founders. So this was some recent research on 1,123 unicorns. They were compared to a random sample of US VC-backed companies. The results were startups with a single founder are 38% less likely to achieve unicorn status. Startups with 3 or 4 co-founders are 74% more likely to become unicorns. Starting a company is hard and going about it alone can be even harder. Investors often prefer companies with multiple co-founders. Some only invest if there are multiple co-founders as well. And here's why. Shared responsibility and decision-making, diverse perspectives and expertise, risk mitigation, complementary skills, increased accountability and grit. If you're starting a venture, remember geese fly 70% farther when they fly together. That's a new one. Hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
Finding the right co-founders to join your startup journey can greatly increase your chances of success. So he then plots out in a chart, it's 2 co-founders, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have invested and do invest in sole founders, but it's sole founders that we believe can garner the resources and the vision and the energy of others to form that complementary team. Because as we've discussed before, we follow a model called PAEI. There are 4 ingredients that an organization has to bring to bear to be successful. You've got to produce results that customers are happy with and that love you. You've got to administrate, so systems, processes, and controls. You've got to entrepreneur, so that's new ideas, new ingredients. And you've got to integrate, that's bringing people and culture together, PAEI. And the problem with all 4 of those ingredients, at any point in time, they're in conflict. And with a sole founder who's got to sell got to get the revenue through the door and build the product and administrate and make sure the bloody BAS is paid and systems and process and think of new products and integrate. Like at any point in time, they're in conflict. The more people you can have at the founder level, what's the founder level really? It's like really loving this baby, having something big to lose, having something big to get, equity, willing to work 20 hours a day. It's harder to get that energy from employees, but not impossible. And we invest a little later stage where you can buy some of that love. But sole foundership, trying to rock out PAEI is just hard. Co-founders is easier, but the problem is there's conflict. And so writing an article about co-founders and not talking about the potential conflict and only talking about the value, to me is daft, because what this data doesn't show is the tens of thousands, if not millions of co-founders that fell apart. Yes, there's 1,000 unicorns where they managed to keep it together. They kept it together with good trust and respect, common vision, values that they weren't willing to breach, behaviors, all the stuff we discussed prior. And yes, co-founders do feature across unicorns, but it's not fucking easy. And if it was, everyone would do it.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the data in terms of how they define co-founder too, and in terms of equal versus non-equal roles or equity holdings and all those other variables. What equity they have, how behavioral incentives are aligned. To your point, Don, like how do they navigate change and conflict? How are they building trust and respect? So I think there's a lot more to this. And what I worry with these sort of charts is founders, particularly new founders, see this and go, oh, wow, I should get a second co-founder. I should get a third, or increase my odds in whatever way, and force a relationship or force themselves into a situation without properly getting to know those people first and addressing all the other things that are needed to make that a successful relationship.
It's like any relationship. There's got to be good chemistry, and chemistry doesn't start by, I want to achieve X result. Oh, do you want to achieve X result? Bang, that's it. And then is it going to last? We don't know if it's going to last until we're in our default behaviors. I think I've said it before. When you hook up with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, book an overseas backpacking trip real fucking quick, because then you'll work out how do you operate when you're tired and cranky and pissed at the other person or somebody's fucked up. Are you compatible? Yeah. And if you're compatible during that, when you get back, crack on. And if you're not, thank you, mother, for the rabbit. Move on.
Oh, there's a founder I know. He's exited now. His strategy when not like getting to know a new girlfriend was travel around Australia together, do a lap, and that would ultimately break up. But I think he was on his third or fourth lap, and he found a long-term partner. So.
There you go. There's generally a commonality. If you're constantly burning through people, you should probably reflect whether it's the outside world or whether you need to
do a solo lap by yourself.
Yes, good point, Jack.
And there was another bit of data that came out this week that when there are co-founders, it seems that some industries attract more co-founders than others. I don't know if you get a chance to see this, but this is some data out of Carter. So biotech had 34% with more than 4 or 5 founders, whereas only 15% were sole founder. Hardware companies, 28%, more than 4 or 5 founders, only 16% sole founders. Medical devices, then it goes down. I think 4 to 5 co-founders dropped to 16% in like consumer and fintech.
I think those, if you look at those, deep tech, like biotech, deep tech, there's probably those that invented, like the scientists, or if it's pharma, for example, there's probably an element of them that have very clearly defined roles within those relationships. I don't know, that's my gut.
I think for those industries, they need more founders so they can start executing from day one. Otherwise, they need capital to bring on salary roles.
Consumer had the highest level of sole founders and one of the lowest levels of multi-founder, and that probably easier to start executing in the consumer space than it is biotech.
Yeah, definitely.
Whether you're a sole founder, 2 founders, 5 founders, 10 founders. Just to end the news bit, Harry Stebbings did a little post during the week, and he said, from 10 years in this business, there are 2 secrets to success. 1, people always underestimate the importance of doing what you said you would. And 2, continuing to show up. Persistence is everything. This is a game of who can survive the longest.
I love it.
Simple but effective. I think it's right.
Yeah. Do the fucking work and show up consistently.
Show up to the hire company and give their shit back.
No comment. But yeah, this is particularly true of the game we're in, right? Like venture capital. You have to be consistent. You have to build trust. You have to do what you said you were going to do. And so even for us, even little things like, and I shouldn't say little things, but having a podcast drop every single week. It shows consistency despite workload, despite the 60,000 other things that we are also prioritizing. Don shows up and gets it done.
Despite not hitting record.
Good.
Yes.
I could see that. I could see the smile start. It was built.
I can see back leaning in, going, just setting it up for me.
Let me have a say. No, it's totally true. It's not persistence at doing the same thing that's not working.
Yeah.
It's persistence overall and knowing, okay, this doesn't work, but I'm going to continue to persist with something new, or I'm going to try this. Oh, I've got to do something else. I must admit, I'm getting more and more intolerant of people that just keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. Like it really is the definition of insanity. So don't get this idea of I've got to keep going down this path. No, the word pivot exists for a reason. The energy is persistence, but it doesn't mean doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Anything else on that, Jack?
No, nothing to add. Big believer in that. Definitely agree with it.
So why don't we get into some charts then?
Yeah. It's that time. We've got to have some charts.
For the last 2 weeks, I think the majority of my listening time has been on Taylor Swift's new album, the Poets Department. This is an interesting chart. Swear words in Taylor Swift's albums.
This is possibly your best chart yet, Don.
Where did you find this, Don?
I reckon he made it. I reckon he's listening to Swifty that much. He's chatted it himself.
Wouldn't be far off, Adam, but Adam. What are we talking about? Trust and respect and get your co-founders' names right. No, Jack, not true. For those at home, on the right-hand side, we have the legend. The words are whore, damn, goddamn, hell, bitch, shit, fuck, dickhead. And it's just exponential. So Fearless and Speak Now had none of those words. Red, it seemed hell was in there. 1989, hell and goddamn used a couple of times. I must admit, I'm a Red and 1989 kind of guy. Some really good stuff in Lover as well. But then from Reputation, it's about the same as 1989. Then Lover steps it up. Folklore, Evermore, it goes from 2 to 15 to 20. Midnight.
That is exponential growth.
There's a couple of things that go through my mind. One of Taylor's strengths since she was a very young age is being able to sing about painful things that at a certain age you knew she couldn't have had experience, but she just either had this worldliness or took stuff from external and turned it into great songs. So I don't fully believe everything she talks about is actually about her. She's just incredibly good at being able to take shit that people experience and turn it into a song. If this is all about her, then I must admit I lament. It does highlight that even if you get whatever you want and you achieve the success you want, doesn't mean that you actually end up in a good and happy position. And the other thing is that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships, is a saying that's constantly used. So I hope this isn't the world that she fully lives in. And she's also very clever from a marketing point of view and creating stuff that people like, and nothing sells like negativity. Like our podcasts, when we're talking about something negative in inverted commas and therefore the heading is negative, you get a lot more listenership.
I had the same thought when I saw this. Is this a chart of product market fit? And she's actually responding to what listeners want.
She's very good at that. I hope the album isn't the world that she actually lives in day to day, because that wouldn't be great. But anyway, still this generation's and probably any generation's greatest performer, artist for many different reasons. Any thoughts on that, Jack?
No thoughts, Don. Well done on finding it.
Now, going from the world's greatest entertainer and performer, artist, into the world's greatest investor, Warren Buffett. Look at the cash. He's sitting on $168 billion worth of cash at the end of last year, up from 105 in 2022. Have a look at that up and to the right. From 2010, he was sitting on 26 billion of cash. Just talk about a cash printing machine.
Yeah.
Now, why do they do it? Having loads of liquidity lets us sleep well. Moreover, during the episodes of financial chaos that occasionally erupt in our economy, we will be equipped both financially and emotionally to play offense while others scramble for survival. Warren Buffett. And so what they do is they just buy great businesses that produce cash, and then when the market shits themselves, they take that cash and buy great businesses at low prices where everybody's having to exit. One of the things that both Warren and Charlie have been clear on is that Bitcoin is a piece of shit. I think Charlie described it as rat poison squared.
Yeah.
Now, recently, as we talked about last week, the Bitcoin halving went through. So that halves the number of new Bitcoins that can be minted. And the general narrative of that is that we're going to the moon again, like we have. But I found this interesting piece that they called it exponential decay. There have been 4 major bull cycles in Bitcoin, with the current advance being the 5th major bull cycle. And they list out the different bull cycles. But what's happening is each advance on a percentage or a number of times is declining by quite a predictable rate. It was 3,200 times roughly the first advance, then 572 times, then 122 times. The last one was 22 times. So if you look at that exponential decay, what is it going to be this time? Now, the way this guy plots it, and his name is Peter Brandt, he takes it by the order of magnitude, that the magnitude of the 2011 to 2013 was approximately 20% of the prior cycle of 2009 to 2011. The 2015 to 2017 bull drive was 20% of the 2011 to 2013 cycle. The 2018 to 21 was approximately 20% of 2015 to 2017 cycle. And worded another way, 80% of the exponential energy of each successful bull market for this asset gets lost. So if he was to apply the same principle and approach, then actually Bitcoin is probably topped because they take the trough of between the last cycle's trough to peak and then allocate that, which is interesting because this week and last week is the first time that we've seen some outflows from Bitcoin ETFs. So in previous episodes, I've been talking about, look at the amount of money going into the ETFs. ETFs have to buy. And I've said each time, as long as there are inflows, this asset is probably going to go up because there's going to be more buyers and sellers. Now we've got outflows and we've actually seen the Bitcoin price start to go the other way. This is not a podcast about forecasting. I can't even get hire equipment back on time. So please be careful what you listen to. But this is really interesting. And this is an asset that certainly goes through some rhymes and rhythm. Yeah.
It's super interesting, that those charts. Yeah, and seeing the shift in stock to flow at the moment.
Now, one of the things I think Bitcoin has been very good at discounting has been interest rate policy. When you look at the view of interest rates in the last few months, has actually been that we could actually be going up or staying higher for longer. And so Bitcoin has shit itself a little bit, or at least pulled back a little bit, whilst the interest rate market has gone the opposite way. Here's a chart for listeners at home. What it's describing is what was the interest rate futures market in Australia predicting the interest rates would be between May and December 2024. Now, on the 22nd of April, the interest rates were predicted to be falling from where they are down by about 1 or 2 cuts. Then a whole lot of data came out around inflation and growth and asset prices. And on the 29th, the market totally went the other way and said, fuck, the RBA is probably going to raise. And part of what is driving that is that the government keeps bloody spending, it would seem at least. And in the world we operate in the family office with a lot of our construction projects, we are getting absolutely smashed because of government projects and the unions paying unbelievable amounts of money. Like you can dead set earn 200 grand making a lift go up and down on some of these government sites. It's maybe that's the way to bootstrap tribe for a little bit more. We each go and get a union job, bolster our capital position. So yeah, I've been saying for a little while, my view is when everybody's expecting something, the universe delivers the opposite. With what's happening in property and wages and the government's continuing to spend, why the hell would the RBA drop rates when things are so good? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And if Bitcoin is an interest rate affected instrument and the market believes that interest rates are going to be higher for longer, I think it makes sense that Bitcoin's gone backwards.
Yep.
Now, the opposite of that is retail spending. Have a look when the government gets involved giving people money, would you? Have a look at COVID period and just how, for the listeners at home, like COVID dropped for a couple of months and then so much money just came into the system. It's just blown any of the data out. Like normally we'd hover around 3, 4, maybe 5% change in retail spending. We were 25% and then it dropped down again and then back to 20%. But anyway, it's dropping a little bit close to zero. So it's not like there isn't some signals that economy's hurting, but some of the stuff I've read is rich boomers that have no debt with a fuckload of cash can buy whatever they want at whatever price. So there's almost like two economies merging of people with cash, which are generally the older generation, inflating or continuing to inflate asset bubbles, while younger people
Did you point at yourself?
With debt.
There's a collective we.
Jack, relative to an 87-year-old boomer sitting on 10 million in cash, I would like to say that I'm young. Because then for a whole lot of people with a lot of debt, I found this, people can't get around Australia and its housing market. We've just always been crazy. Have a look at this chart. And I think what this chart actually shows is we are an economy of variable interest rates predominantly. Have a look at that spike and that increase of the household sector and its debt service ratios. But it hasn't really occurred in the US. Why? Because in the US, when you buy a house, you take a 30-year fixed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk happening in the US about how not a lot of housing is turning over. Why would you turn over if you can sit there on a 2.5% interest rate for 30 years, or if you sell your house to buy something else, you've now got to pay 8%. This chart shows that from the GFC, our household debt service ratio has been dropping from what, like 18% down to 13%. But then from this last period of interest rates, it's from 13% up to nearly 20%. Now, it's the rate of change that's always the problem. The absolute number is not really such the big issue. It's just when something so fast happens. So if so much money is going to debt service for people with debt, you're probably going to have a problem in the retail industry turnover. So I think those two charts are linked. But if you're someone sitting a lot of cash with no debt, this means nothing to you. I was talking to an agent the other day, a place in Annerley, expectations of $2 million. Like it wasn't so long ago before $2 million for a house in Brisbane was like, oh, you're like top echelon. 160 inquiries.
Yeah.
On a $2 million place in Annerley.
Yeah. We've been looking at places and open houses, and last weekend, one that we walked into was a $3 million property and had seriously about 60 couples at the open house. Now, how many were actually prospective buyers as opposed to gawkers is another question, because we were gawking.
You got to put it out in the world, Aaron. You got to be there. You got to be manifesting.
Absolutely.
Now, in the US, it's a little bit different. That market absolutely believes that it's going to see some interest rate cuts. The market in the US is effectively saying that by the end of 24, there's going to be at least 1 or 2 cuts, and then there'll be another 2 or 3 cuts in 25. So we'll see what happens there. One of the pushes, if Trump gets back into elected office, there's this push to say that the president should help set rates. Could you imagine Donald Trump having a finger on interest rates?
Any element of political bias, and it's already biased enough in those decisions, like far out. But man, the world's going to get interesting super fast.
Yeah. Whilst I've just attacked boomers constantly through this episode, here's a little chart showing the inheritances that are coming and the amount of money that Gen Z, millennials, and Gen Xers are in line to transition as the boomers die off. Some big dollars.
Yeah, far out.
But it's currently still sitting mostly in the control of the boomer wave. Those are the charts.
Interesting. There's always something random, always something insightful, and you're left scratching your head going, now what do I do with all that information?
And where the fuck does Don spend his time to pull that rubbish?
Solid effort though, Don. They were good.
So what are we looking forward to?
Oh, I'm off to Sydney this weekend for my niece's wedding. Looking forward to that. It's going to be a quick visit. Down Saturday morning, back Sunday morning.
By definition, you can't be young if you've got a niece getting married.
No, yeah. My blended family Brady Bunch dynamic means I had nieces and nephews when I was 12.
Okay.
And no, my parents weren't related or any interbreeding.
Oh, that'll be fun. Jack, I believe you were robbed.
Yeah, we were robbed.
The ref.
Yeah, it was a bit controversial.
Robbed and injured. Are you playing this
I'm
weekend?
still hopping around on crutches. Not playing this weekend. It's not getting any better. Like it's the swelling's only starting to come up now, so it's bloody sore.
So Jack, what you're just describing is what happens at 8 a.m. when you're 40. Like it's just.
This is me walking back from the gym.
Yeah. But I'll be going down and supporting, so I'll be watching this weekend.
Awesome.
What about you, Don?
Libby has a hens thing all weekend, so I've got all the kids and we're going to do some rad stuff. Where we went camping last week, they had like a bike track for the kids, and they're at that age. So I'm going to offload my youngest to my sister-in-law for a couple of hours, and then the older kids and Dad are going to get the excavator out, and we are going to make the sweetest little bike track you have ever seen. And I'm hoping I can end it with a thing into the creek. So we're going to be doing that together as our father-child project. Now, will they be allowed to test it first? No, it will be my responsibility.
Am I going to have 2 injured team members next week?
It's probably going to, because I didn't take my bike camping. There was a point where these kids were going over, and I'm like, oh, I could show them some tricks here.
Oh, far out. That is so good.
So looking forward to it. And then, as I told you yesterday, some prick at the creek side came out and cut my fences. I don't know what they were trying to do. And so I'll also be repairing fences, so I didn't get a call like I did yesterday of someone a few Ks away saying, oh, I think I've got your cows. They'd managed to get their way through a 4-lane road through to another property. So I go set up some cameras. I'm trying to work out how I can put an electric thing that's hidden in the grass. And so if they come along, they get just the shock of their life.
Booby traps.
But I'm not an angry person. I'm like fully well adjusted and wouldn't seek retribution. All right. Good.
See you guys.
Thanks, boys.
All right, lads.
Yeah.